Thank you to the conference organizers for giving me a chance to discuss my thoughts on this topic. And just going forward with what has already been discussed by the previous speakers related to education and the access gap to education when it comes to gender. What I'm going to discuss is impediments to girls joining productive work. Now, let's first acknowledge the elephant in the room. When you look at ILO, the global picture of gender gap itself is very, very apparent. So for men, the labor force participation is 75%, whereas that for women is 49%. When you try and look at the same, pattern in India, it is even more stark because men in general have a higher labor force participation in India, which you can see is 78.8%. But for women, it's almost as low as 27.6%. Now, an even more depressing fact is that these 27.2% women that we are talking about, they are having an overrepresentation in certain types of vulnerable jobs. When I use the term vulnerable jobs, it becomes extremely important for me to first clarify what I mean by vulnerable jobs. So what we mean by vulnerable jobs is that these women have lower social protection access, which means that they wouldn't have EPF, PPF benefits the way we enjoy EPS and all. Secondly, most of the women are particularly involved in unpaid work, especially when we think about the rural sector, and they are again engaged in casual labor. So let's take a step back and just, think about why is gender gap important. Gender gap matters because when women have restricted freedom to work, it actually erodes basic human welfare. And even when we think from a very economic perspective, it actually means that there is high gaps in employment, which will then hamper our contribution to GDP, to growth, and to development, and so on and so on. So, when we are talking about a problem that women are not represented as much as men in the workforce, it's important to consider, are women voluntarily not entering the workforce, or is there some other problem? So we need to understand what do women want. Now, according to an international survey done for women, among women by the ILO, 70% of women across the world responded that they would prefer to work in paid jobs. In India also, the number stood at 52%. Now, when you compare this with the actual female labor force participation of 22%, there is a huge gap. What is this? What are the factors which actually drive this divergence in preference and in reality? This is the main question that I will try to delve into in the next 4 minutes. And if you're looking for a one-line answer, it's very simple, which actually a lot of in fact, each and every speaker in the past has acknowledged, which is that a woman's preference is not just her own choice, but it is heavily influenced by external constraints and the pressure to conform to traditional gender roles. So now let's look at why is there such a high gender gap in employment. Again, because I am an economist, so first I'll discuss some of the very obvious economic factors. Now, I think the first speaker did mention that because there are many policies as well as schemes at the state level, you have the midday meal, you have the right to education, and you have several state level schemes. You also have schools with usable toilets. We have seen broad increases in women's educational attainment, as a result of which young women are choosing to continue with their education and not enter the workforce. Of course, we must mention over here that the biggest disclaimer is that the quality of education is again questionable currently in most public schools. The second thing that people try to understand as to why is it that women are underrepresented in Indian job market is because sufficient jobs are not created in large number of sectors that could easily absorb women, especially for those in rural areas. So what we are seeing, if you just compare these 2 points, that means what? That there is a rise in education for women, but most of the women are not being able to find jobs in India. As a result of which, there is this very famous, artifact in Indian labor market, that there is a declining labor force participation of women in India from 2005 to 20. Obviously, the question that comes to our mind is what happened in 2020 with COVID, and I will discuss that as well in the future. The next thing that one may think is there any relation of women entering the job market or labor market with the income that the household is earning? What is found is that there, at least in the rural areas and even in certain urban pockets, that when there is a rise in income, it leads to lower labor force participation. Why? Because women working is seen as a sign of a degradation of social status or preference. Another very systematic economic issue related to women's work is that domestic chores which women are involved in is not accounted for in GDP. Well, till now what I've discussed is very obvious economic factors, but we know that the problem is much more serious. We know that the problem is multifaceted because there is social stigma and gender norms, right? So you have prevalence of patriarchal norms and pressures to fit into traditional gender-specific roles. Secondly, women bear this huge responsibility of taking care of the household, of obviously getting married at a younger age in a society like India, and also childbearing. All of these make women very, actually make women, or rather the households in which women want to work, very skeptic of women entering the job market. Thirdly, an important problem in a developing country like India is weak infrastructure. You do not have better toilet facilities. Of course, toilets are being built right now, but when you think about rural areas where the woman has to travel and go to large distances, the absence of toilets in their workplace, very bad road connectivity or very low frequency of bus services makes it very, very difficult for women to actually join the productive work. A very important issue would also be safety. You have several instances of eve teasing, molestation, and rapes. When all of these things are combined with a very weak degree of police efficacy, it is understood that women would also be scared or would not feel safe at going to work. And finally, at times we've also seen that whether it be informal spaces or even formal spaces, even the organized sector, the workplace does not make a conducive environment for women to continue work. Now, having discussed these factors, what has happened in the last 2 years is even more depressing. COVID-19 has exacerbated a lot of pre-existing inequalities, whether we talk about gender-based inequality or class-based inequality or even caste-based inequality. Now, in the case of India, what we just discussed was that India already had, declining women participation in the labor force. What happened with COVID-19 is that the gap has widened and it continues to widen. Why? First is because there is unavailability of steady, gainful employment for women. And secondly, was the situation where we saw that the type of sectors that faced the brunt of COVID lockdown much more severely were actually the sectors which probably were hiring women more than men. So that would be our hospitality sector, retail sector, domestic and childcare services. So these sectors saw a very huge decline in employment in general and for women in specific. Another important point, even when we think for women who are in the formal workforce, is the unequal access to information and communication devices like mobile phones, like computers at home, which makes it very difficult for women to continue with their studying as well as work. Having painted a very sort of sad reality type of picture, does it mean that there is no solution to the problem? Actually, no. There is and a lot of changes are happening around us, but what is the basic gist of what can serve as a solution to this problem is as follows. First of all, we need active participation of local self-governance institutions, NGOs like Mahila Mandals, cooperatives, self-help groups, Kudumbashrees, because these are places which actually provide a very strong network for women for finding jobs and also for changing the existing norms, which in general are very structured. Secondly, they can also, provide very safe spaces to spread awareness to other family members who have a very strong say in the decision of this woman to work outside. Secondly, what is also required is that vocational training and skill development of young women. Now, the government has a lot of schemes when it comes to education, primary level education as well as secondary level education. And obviously, training and skill development is one important thing which makes these women well equipped to enter the workforce and make a living out of it. Thirdly, access to mobile phones, computers, and internet services are instrumental in breaking traditional obstacles. Why? Because if a woman has an access to a good mobile phone as well as computer, she can not only look for jobs much more easily, which means the job search cost is reducing, but it also provides her a better match for her skill set in terms of the type of job that she is looking for. And finally, it provides her flexibility of managing the household and still being able to participate in formal work. A very important thing that right now is not being given a lot of importance is that jobs need to be created in sectors that hire women, right? And finally, we need to provide greater social benefits, security, and very conducive work environment for women. I'll stop here. Thank you.